Okay, well, I've got straight up 2 o'clock here, so we're going to go ahead and jump in and get started. I want to welcome everyone to our math reform update. Appreciate you making time on a busy Friday toward the beginning of the semester. I hope everyone's semester is going well. First and foremost, just want to give you kind of an overview of what we're going to get into today here and kind of give you a snapshot of the schedule here. We are going to go over the three pieces of the math reform work, math pathways specifically, co-requisite remediation, and course placement. Then there'll be some time for questions. Then we will transition into the University System of Georgia, and Jonathan Hull is here. Appreciate Jonathan taking the time to come and share the insights from Georgia. They've been engaged in this work for about the last decade, and are going to talk specifically about co-requisite remediation and system-wide course placement standards, and there'll be opportunities for some questions thereafter. And then we will break out by institutional peers, and we'll have some instructions on that here in a little bit, and we're going to specifically get into some math pathways related discussion, and then we'll report out and we'll wrap up between 3:50 and 4 p.m. So again, thank you for being here. At the outset, I do want to emphasize that obviously something like this doesn't just automatically happen. We didn't just wake up one day and move this direction. There's a lot of pieces, a lot of things that happen that really set the foundation for this type of work. And in our case, I think there's really four specific kind of components to point to that really set the stage for this work and really got the wheels in motion here. I think the first big thing to talk about is obviously the math reform wave. Some of you all are certainly aware of that. You've gone to conferences in other states, or you've read the Higher Education Chronicle or InsideHigherEd.com. There's been a tremendous wave throughout the country to really reshape a lot of undergraduate math, kind of traditional practices. You've seen states and systems change the way that they define general education math requirements and trying to be a lot more intentional about having options and pathways that are not solely college algebra based, and making those really clear and concrete. There have been states and systems that have changed the mechanism by which students are placed into general education math courses. 20 years ago, everyone would have been primarily utilizing standardized tests, ACT, SAT, or Compass, or Accuplacer. Obviously, we're seeing more and more states and systems really tap into the high school record. There's a lot to work with there in terms of an overall body of work. So we'll get into that a little bit. And then states and systems have also changed the way in which students are remediated, obviously going from more of a traditional kind of prerequisite structure to more of a just-in-time co-requisite type of structure here. And I think it's really important to emphasize that unlike a lot of policy changes in education, these have not been isolated to one part of the country. It's not been something where something kind of popped up in one region and slowly kind of morphed its way into other regions, or it's not been something that's just been a red state issue or a blue state issue. This has been something that has really permeated throughout the country, and it's hit East Coast states, West Coast states, the Midwest, the South. It's hit red states and blue states. Some of this work has been done through legislatures. Some have been done through more of a board structure. So there's been various ways of getting there, but those have really been the two pieces that have played a role in kind of moving these and kind of initiating this type of activity. But it's definitely been one of the larger kind of policy reforms. When you look at things that have been done over the last 5 to 10 years, this would definitely rank up toward the top there when you look at things that have been done kind of in the undergraduate education space. So you have that's really occurred on the national level. I think that's been very significant. When we look closer to home in Kansas, there's been a lot of things the last few years, one of which was the Future Council of Higher Education. This is a group that really reforms about every 10 years, and they really come together to look at current issues, make recommendations about the future of higher education, and there's legislators and business and industry people and institutional representatives. And there was a lot of interest in math reform, and that was something that was kind of unique, where the folks that were on the group were actually requesting that we present that. We really did not come in with any kind of agenda, and that was something they requested. And there was very strong interest in really moving forward with making some significant changes. And when this group kind of finalized the recommendations, some of which were fiscal affairs, some of which were more student affairs, and some of which were academic affairs. But I think they made about 10, I can't remember, 10 to 15 recommendations. But the number 1 and 2 recommendations were math pathways and co-requisite remediation. And so there's definitely a really strong sentiment from that group that we needed to move forward and do something quickly. We were, in the midst of a pandemic, so timing was not ideal. We were sensitive to that. At the same time, we also had the Building a Future strategic plan that KBOR has that we were kind of putting the finishing touches on right around that same time, going back to the pandemic time, which really places a strong emphasis on proven practices, best practices that put us in a position to remove barriers and advance success, completion, and affordability. And so obviously, math reform certainly touches on those areas. And then lastly, you have the Council of Presidents. And this is a group that meets once a month. They meet the morning. Our board meets on a Wednesday afternoon once a month. This group meets in the morning with a whole bunch of groups that meet the morning of board meetings, and the state university presidents are represented here. The technical sector has representation here. The community college sector has representation here. Washburn has representation here. And there was definitely a strong urge from that group that we really engage in some discussions about math reform. Specifically, there was a strong interest in math pathways. And so that really prompted us as board staff. This was back in June of 2022, and that recommendation didn't happen. That prompted us as board staff to reach out to the Dana Center, which is housed at the University of Texas at Austin. I think a lot of you all are probably familiar with the Dana Center and the work that they do. They're really one of the leading entities in the country at shaping undergraduate math reform, and they've done some really good work in states and systems across the country. And when we reached out to them, they indicated that there would be a technical assistance grant that we would potentially be a candidate for. So we worked on that grant summer of 2022. We were awarded that grant September of 2022. And so we've been working with them on this work, and they've certainly been a very valuable partner. So appreciate their help. We also created a math task force with faculty and staff representation. So that group has been also very instrumental and supportive. So appreciate that group. But there's really three big pieces to this work here. The first big piece is math pathways. And when we talk about math pathways, very important to note that this is really what math pathways looks like for the vast majority of students in our system. When you really look at the data here, we have this wide lane that we send the vast majority of our students down here. So you'll see here 16,761 students enrolled in college algebra in AY21. That was the third highest enrolled course in our system. Only English Composition 1 and English Composition 2, which are the freshman writing courses that everyone has to take, ranked ahead of it in terms of total enrollments here. So that's just some background information. But this really ends up being the default math course for the vast majority of students in our system. There are some exceptions to that. Washburn's done some things independently with math pathways. We certainly have some colleges and departments within universities that have had alternative math requirements, which is great. But the challenge is we haven't really had a coordinated effort that's really permeated across institutional lines. And so with that, I think there's been a lot of mixed messages and concerns and uncertainties. And as a result, there's been this tendency to put most every student in college algebra. And this slide here really just kind of illustrates the disproportionate number of students enrolled in college algebra when you look at it in comparison to contemporary math. So this is AY22. We're looking at concurrent enrollment numbers. So we're talking about students who are in high school who are taking college courses. The vast majority of these students are going to be a high school junior or senior, again, taking a college course while in high school. And so we look at college algebra, over 6,600 students enrolled in college algebra in AY22. So obviously a very robust number there. Just take a minute here. I know obviously you're all muted right now, but just take a minute here and kind of think in your head, take a wild guess how many you think enrolled in contemporary math concurrent enrollment. Some may say 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 500. If you were anywhere near any of those, you would be a very bad contestant on The Price is Right because you would have overbid. We have a total of 5 students, concurrent enrollment students, take contemporary math in AY22. So obviously a very disproportionate number of our students are enrolling in college algebra. When we look at concurrent enrollment specifically, we look at college algebra, just some background here. This was created to really prepare students for calculus. The reality is that only about 20% of undergraduate majors require calculus. Despite the fact that the vast majority of majors do not require calculus, we're still sending the vast majority of students down that calculus road. And so again, 16,761 students, the third highest enrolled course in our system. And so again, we go back to this here. College algebra, when we look at the data, for the vast majority of students in our system, it really is kind of the default math course. And really, at the heart of Math Pathways, the goal is to restructure this pathway, refine it, narrow and concentrate it down to those majors that ultimately have a calculus-based requirement. That's really the goal here when we look at Math Pathways, is to really set college algebra ultimately for those majors that have a calculus-based requirement. There are going to be some exceptions to that. We do understand there's going to be some science-based degrees that don't require calculus, where algebra knowledge is going to be really critical, or higher level algebra knowledge. So there'll be some exceptions here and there. But as a rule of thumb, college algebra is the default math course for those majors that ultimately require calculus. And we certainly acknowledge that there are going to be some high-level students, which is great, that go immediately into calculus or even bypass some of the calculus courses. That doesn't change here. But we look at this again in terms of college algebra. It should only really be required for those majors that require calculus here for the most part. There are other math course options that provide more relevant math skills for the majority of majors in our system. And quantitative reasoning and statistics have really emerged as two. And these have kind of been the common pathways that have emerged in a lot of other states that have engaged in this work. There are some differences here and there, but when you look at these two courses, again, these courses provide more relevant math skills for the majority of majors, and we were able to kind of validate that work here through some surveying that we did. And some of you all may be aware of this. We did some pretty detailed surveying last spring, and it was last March. And we had this open for close to 4 weeks. We opened this up right after spring break. So I think it was like late March, early April, that time frame. And essentially, we surveyed people on skills that were tied to college algebra, stats core, elementary stats, and then quantitative reasoning, which we call contemporary math here. And so we had that open again for about 3.5 weeks. In terms of outcomes here, obviously, we don't have enough time to cover everything here. Obviously, there's too much to cover here, but I think there's really 2 specific disciplines that you'll be of interest in, or some of you all would find interesting. The first of which is the social science discipline, which encompasses a lot of specific majors like psychology, political science, sociology, social work, geography, those types of things here. And when we look at that here, what you're going to see here is the percentage of respondents that rated each skill as being critical. And so what you're going to see off to the left side here, these are college algebra skills here. So again, we're looking at the percentage of respondents that noted each skill as being critical. Again, we're looking at social science respondents. So you'll see that the social science skills were not rated as being very critical. You'll see that the college algebra skills were not rated as being very critical. Only one was above 50% there with the graphing functions here. What you'll see on the right side, you're going to see a very stark contrast with the set of skills that come up here. These are skills that are tied to our elementary statistics course here. So these went up dramatically here. When you look at these, there are 9 total skills here. When you look at the skills here, ranging from collecting data over to the right side, random sampling, there are a total of 9 skills. It's like I'm on Ferris Bueller when I say 9, but there are 9 skills here total. 9 out of 9, all 9 had a supermajority, meaning 67% or more rated the skill as being critical. So when you break that down in a comparison format, we went 9 for 9 on supermajority with the statistics skills, and we went 0 for 9 for college algebra. And at least 80% of the participants specified that 7 out of the 9 stat skills were critical, which I think was pretty significant here. So, but at the end of the day, the stats course or the stat skills are far more relevant. And the social science discipline representatives, when we met with them back in May, unanimously agreed to adopt that as their pathway course going forward here. So we're going to be moving forward there. Obviously, the prerequisite of college algebra, I think, still exists at some institutions. Obviously, in order for this to function and for us to be practical about that, we are going to have to work on phasing that out by fall of 2026. Important to note that the Mathematical Association of America has expressed that a college algebra is not needed as a prerequisite when you really do the back mapping for an introductory stat class, that only kind of a high school algebra 1 type course. That's really the algebra knowledge that's really critical for a student to be successful. They've come out and stated that, and that really is something that a student takes, I think, when they're in 8th or 9th grade, if I remember correctly. So obviously, there'll be some opportunities to talk more about that at the KCOG, the Kansas Core Outcomes Group meeting that's going to come up on October the 9th here, I think in 3 weeks. So similar feedback here to share when we talk about the arts and humanities discipline here. Again, I want to bring up the college algebra based skills off to the left here. And again, these were rated very low. Again, by contrast, you'll see these were rated significantly higher when we look specifically at contemporary math-based skills here. We're not looking at stats. We're now looking at the contemporary math-grade skills. They rated that skill set the highest among the 3. And again, they unanimously agreed to adopt that as their general education pathway going forward. In terms of that, we do have a system-wide transfer course that's on the books for contemporary math. It was written in a pretty general way, which I think a lot of states who have done this work were kind of in that space before they really codified it as a clear and concrete math pathway. Now, though, that we are pinpointing it as a math pathway throughout the system, I think there's definitely opportunities to maybe have a little more detail and to have some outcomes that are a little bit more measurable going forward here, because obviously this is going to have a higher demand, and the course will have certainly a greater curricular presence and reach going forward here. So again, that'll be the opportunities to talk about that at the KCOG meeting coming up on October the 6th here. So yeah, they agreed to adopt the contemporary math course. The last piece I do want to talk about when we talk about math pathways is talking specifically about the Associate of Applied Science degrees. Obviously, I know we have some technical colleges, we have community colleges that offer AAS degrees. At one point early in my career, I did work at a technical college, so I certainly recognize the uniqueness here. Certainly, there's going to be an avenue for technical math and in some of those programs. There may be some cases here where one of these courses is a better fit, and so obviously we still need to talk to some of the other disciplines, education, health sciences and exercise sciences, those kind of things. We also want to talk to the technical math folks or the technical programs to get a feel for what skills are critical in their respective disciplines here. So that is certainly something on our radar and something we plan to do this year as well. So I just want to make sure that the technical folks knew that was on our radar. The next thing I want to get into is co-requisite remediation, which I know is everyone's favorite topic. And when we get into co-requisite here, I think probably a lot of people that are on this understand, but some may not. So I do want to provide kind of a basic background here. I'd really kind of go over some of the common models. And so the first one is more of a prerequisite model where you take 1 to 2 or sometimes even 3 prerequisite remedial courses that do not count toward the degree. This has been the most traditional format that institutions have often used for decades. And on the national stage, this hasn't worked well. When you look at states, it hasn't worked well. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked as well for students in Kansas as we'd like it. When we look at data here and we look at students who are placed in a remedial math class, only about 23% of those are able to complete a general education math course in a 2-year period thereafter. So that's not to pick on any institution. It's just to show that the model unfortunately hasn't been as effective as we'd like it to be for students. So there are other models here. You have the foundation model where you limit the remediation to 1 semester. And then the student is able to elevate into the credit-bearing course the subsequent semester. So you take the remedial course in the fall, you take the credit course in the spring. The outcomes in that type of format have been better, but the co-requisite one has been significantly better here. When you compare the 3, this is where you integrate the remedial content into the credit-bearing course, and the student remediates and completes a general education course in 1 semester. And that's really what we're going for as we move forward and plan to scale this by fall of 2026. In terms of how this works here, this is fairly simple here, but again, I do want to take the time to illustrate it in a pretty basic way here. The big question really boils down to, does the student meet a system-wide course placement measure, which would be a requisite ACT score, SAT score, or some sort of high school performance standard? That's something we're going to work on later this year and bringing some folks together later this fall on setting what those requirements look like. So we'll be bringing people together to work on that, to look at high school grades and to look how that correlates to college success and things like that. So we'll be working on creating some system course placement standards. So does the student meet a system-wide course placement measure or an institutionally designated measure, which is number 2 there, which the question is, what does that mean? That could be a number of different things. It could be a homegrown assessment that you've been using. It could be the ALEX assessment that some of the larger institutions have. It could be another vendor-based assessment that I'm not aware of, or something that emerges in the future. But what it boils down to is, does the student meet one of those measures? And if the answer is yes, and the student is eligible to go into the Gateway course section, standalone Gateway course section, does not need any co-requisite remediation. If the answer is no, then the student will be eligible to enroll in the Gateway course along with a co-requisite developmental education support section. So again, that would provide an avenue for that just-in-time remediation where they can remediate and complete a general education course in one semester. And there are different ways in which to offer this particular, or I guess not this particular, but there are different avenues by which institutions can deliver the co-requisite model. We continually heard, as we were working on this and getting feedback, we continually heard the importance of having flexibility. And so we tried to incorporate flexibility here, but I think we would strongly recommend and urge institutions as much as possible, particularly with your students who are most at risk, to do a supplemental course section. That's where the student attends a lecture, and then they also go to a supplemental support section, and it could be on opposite days, or perhaps it could be later on that same day. There are different ways in which you can go about doing that. And there's obviously different ways you can structure these in terms of using the same instructor for both, or using different instructors, or having the students who are in co-requisite, are they mixed with students who don't need remediation, or do you keep them together the whole time? There's different ways in which you can do that. In Georgia, when Jonathan presents, they've been able to really look at some data there, and I think make some good recommendations and have a good idea of what works better. So we'll look forward to that. Mandatory tutoring section would be a student would go to a class again on a Monday, Wednesday from 9 to 10:20 or whatever the duration would be. And then along with that, they would enroll in a tutoring section that they would be able to go to. It would be probably they have to go a specified number of hours per week, but it wouldn't be set where they'd have to go every day at 10. There'd be that flexible angle. So that's certainly an option, but probably something that would work better for someone who's just below the college level, who's really motivated, may benefit from that. Other options here, we have a boot camp section where you really front load the remedial content, and you really review and go over the basics at the beginning, and then you devote the remainder of the course to the college content. So there's certainly an option for there. And then you have a compressed course section, which is really an old school idea. This is something that's been around for a long time. I know when I worked at a community college campus 20 years ago, this was a very common occurrence where we would structure a 16-week semester where we would have an intermediate algebra the first 8 weeks was a developmental education course, and then we'd have the college course the second 8 weeks, and the student again would be able to complete the general education course in one semester. And we would definitely urge caution on that one, because that one, I think there's a lot of data showed that's been not nearly as effective, but it certainly is an option nonetheless here. So the last piece I do want to touch on gets into course placement. So the big thing with course placement, I think that's emerged here. I think a lot of people, again, are aware of this, so I'm not really shedding light on anything new. But the big thing here that's emerged, we're going to hear about this more with Georgia, obviously, here in a moment, is that the high school GPA and grades in certain high school courses has really emerged as a really good predictor. And there's been multiple large-scale data sets that have shown that it's a better predictor versus an ACT or an SAT. And so good news is that we've had a lot of institutions in our system the last several years who have adopted some sort of high school performance measure as a means to place students in math courses, which is great. We still have a few that haven't done that, or at least I don't think have done that yet. But we'll obviously be working on that. I think one of the big issues is the variance in the standards from institution to institution. So just to kind of illustrate this, a common question that we get is, what is required to enroll in college algebra? That's something we get when we talk to the State Department of Education, or we have high school counselors reach out to us, and the answer is we don't know. There's up to 32 different answers for that, and that's extremely, extremely rare for a state to not have established that. I worked in the Oklahoma higher education system for a number of years, and they'd done this work, I think, in the 80s or 90s. I worked there from 2001 up to 2019, and I always remember that being there. Texas has done that. Colorado's done that. Missouri's done that. And so really this, I think, helps a lot with relations with K-12, because we want to be able to pinpoint, this is what you need to be college ready for college algebra. This is what you need to be college ready to enroll in a stats or contemporary math here. Because without that, then there's just a bunch of mixed messages and moving targets. And I think there's a lot of confusion. That's certainly a lot of feedback we've had from counselors about, well, they're college ready if they go to this college, but not this one. Or there's even been cases where a community college will have a higher standard than a university, and that creates a lot of confusion. And so one of the things that our board, the Kansas Board of Regents and the Kansas State Department of Education, they've been really hyper-focused on coming together and really trying to identify ways where we can really ease that transition from high school to college, and really try to simplify things as much as possible. And that works right into that space. And so we are going to be bringing some folks together again to create some system-wide course placement standards, and that work will start later this fall. In terms of timing here, when we look at this and where we're going from here, the big thing this year, we're in AY24, which you break that down, is fall 23, spring 24, obviously. So as I mentioned before, revisiting the system-wide transfer stats and contemporary math courses there, kind of revisiting those outcomes. So we'll be doing that coming up on October 6th, and then obviously aligning the pathways. We've got some additional work to do. We want to meet with the education disciplines and get a feel for what they want to implement as their math pathway. We want to meet with health and exercise sciences. There's some unique programs at K-State, for example, with them having the land grant mission. There's some programs that are very unique that they only offer, but there's still a lot of students who start out at community colleges that ultimately filter into those programs. So we want to make sure to work with them and get those all lined out. So we'll be doing that. And then we go into AY25. With that, that would be this time next year. So a big piece in this is going to be creating some professional development. I think one of the things that we'll probably be doing this year in the near future is trying to get a feel for where everyone is at and what will be meaningful and impactful in terms of professional development, because we know that people are at different places. With co-requisite as an example, we have some that are majority or all co-requisite. We have some that have just kind of dipped their toe in the water and done a little bit. We have some that haven't touched it yet. And there's really no wrong answer on that at this point, but we have to acknowledge that people are at different places. So we want to be able to cater and tailor this to the uniqueness of the institution and what their needs are. So we'll be doing some surveying to get a feel for where you're at, what you want, and also kind of the mix of it. We'd like to do some things that would be in person and some things that would be virtual. We want to know what the right mix would be. We want to know, we want to do something that's going to be meaningful and impactful, but it's not going to be too onerous. So we want to be cognizant of that. So we'll be doing some surveying on that, and then working on that this time next year and integrating it into the schedule. And then institutions will work on the co-requisite supports and the designing the math pathways. And then as we move forward into AY26, we pinpoint that specifically. We're talking about a soft launch period where there'd be an expectation for at least one section of each gateway math course that applies to the degrees on its campus. Each institution would have that expectation, and there'd be an expectation to offer at least one section of co-requisite math support developmental education for each gateway math course that applies to the degree offerings on its campus. And then we get into AY27. So we're talking 3 years from now, fall of 2026. And we'd be using those system-wide course placement measures at that point. And there would be full-scale co-requisite and full-scale math pathways. That's where we would be there. And so do you want to take a moment here and take any questions here? I am looking at a couple of these here. Feel free to ask any questions, type any questions. There's a Q&A box there. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so I think everyone sees this as early presentation. You said that math placement measures based upon standard means was not a great indicator of readiness. However, late in the presentation, you said that this is how the Board of Regents would decide whether or not a student needs remediation. Seems the thought process guidance is self-refuting. Okay. I definitely think there's still a place. I apologize if I may have misstated something. I think that when you look at GPA and grades in certain high school courses, that's shown to be a better predictor. It doesn't mean that the ACT, SAT goes away and you ignore it. I still think there's going to be a place, but I think that I think it's a misguided system to solely rely on that, because I think that the high school grades and again a GPA is a better indicator of someone's heart, and it's a little bit more thorough body of work because you're talking about 4 years of work versus one test on one day. But again, I still think there's a place for both of them there. Let's see, this another question here. Let's see. Okay, what does full scale mean and how long? That means that we would be doing 100% implementation on co-requisite as well as math pathways, and how long that would mean that we would start that process. There would be a soft launch fall of 2025, and then we would be full scale fall of 2026. And we'll share certainly the timeline with everyone. We're going to get a website going as well in the near future here to communicate information. We should have done that by now. I apologize. Another question here is to clarify, each Gateway math course will have its own just-in-time co-requisite. Is it correct? Yes. So there would be a co-requisite design for contemporary math as well as stats, because I think that's kind of been, at least I haven't looked into this to see what the trajectory is to enroll in like a contemporary math course, but I can remember years ago working at a community college in another state, and we were having students often do the pre-algebra and then some sort of introductory or elementary algebra and then intermediate algebra, and then they had to have all those to get in contemporary math. And I don't think a lot of that was probably necessary, but yeah, there would be a co-requisite tied to each respective Gateway pathway. Okay, if math pathways courses are offered earlier than the fall 25, spring 26, can we count on those courses transferring as a required math credit if the institution that the student is transferring to does not offer the new pathways courses? I think that we will probably want to outline a couple of scenarios like that in the future. And obviously, we'd want to urge as much flexibility as possible with the transition. I mean, obviously, I don't want to speak to every scenario and situation right now without talking to people first. But I think that we will want to take some time to do that. And I think that's a fair question to ask. So I think that we will try to outline some scenarios and see if we can kind of get some agreement on we do handle those situations, because you are having some folks that are wanting to jump in and implement early and are going to be there. You're going to have some that are going to, follow the process and implement by fall 26. So I think we want to try to meet people or meet the student where they're at really on things like this. So I think we'll try to issue some guidance on that and work with institutions if we move forward. Okay. As we design the academic maps due in July, should we use college algebra stats as the gen ed bucket requirements for this next year, or should we use the breakdown you just explained for the social science, arts and humanities, contemporary math, etc.? So you don't have to do this until fall of 2026. I mean, obviously, if institutions are able to adopt earlier, that's great, and we would certainly encourage that, but it's certainly not required. because I know that some institutions are going to need some time to make those adjustments, and we want to be sensitive to that. But I think that these are other good questions to talk about and really transitional pieces. And we're talking about a degree map. I think everyone is probably aware of what a degree map is, but it's just a kind of a semester by semester course schedule that says this is what you take the fall semester of your freshman year. This is what you take the spring semester of your freshman year. This is what you take the fall semester of your sophomore year, and just kind of outlines things and really has it set up in a way where you can account for prerequisites and planning, because, a lot of our programs are really sequential. And this is something that the National Institute for Student Success at Georgia State University, that state universities and one of our community colleges went through. And so we're kind of implementing that as a best practice. And so everyone will have those, and they'll be starting in July. It's a whole nother thing, but okay, to what extent do you see math pathways impacting and doing the work of KCOG and TAC? I don't necessarily see a significant amount of work. I mean, there may be disagreements when we meet coming up on October the 6th, but I really think the big issue is the statistics, the college algebra prerequisite for statistics. Revisiting that, I know that's a challenging issue, but there definitely have been other states that have dealt with that. So that's a big piece. And then I think just possibly making some tweaks to the contemporary math now that we're going to have this as a concrete requirement, and we're going to increase the offerings significantly. And there's some specific skills that we've surveyed on. There may be an avenue to make some adjustments there, but I wouldn't necessarily see this as being an ongoing thing. I think hopefully we'll be able to get a lot of that done completely at that October 6th meeting. The question is, how will this affect engineering programs whose gateway math course is typically Calculus 1? Yeah, I mean, certainly we don't really see this impacting the engineering programs, architecture programs, and when there's other, obviously, STEM programs, computer science, they're going to require calculus, and that we would certainly understand that that's the expectation. They're going to come in at a calculus level, but if for some reason they're not, then college algebra would be the course. So yeah, we certainly understand that there's going to be people again, who are going to be able to test and go directly into calculus, but it shouldn't really impact any of their work. Math Pathways is really about reshaping the structure for those majors that don't require calculus more than anything. Can you talk a little bit more about the quantitative reasoning pathway? The other two are very straightforward. However, this one is not as clear. Is the pathway envisioned as a math course or a course that could be offered outside the math department that covers these topics? I would 100% envision this being a math course. I wouldn't see that any other way. And I think that's fair. I think that when you look at the outcomes that are written for stats and college algebra, they're very clear, they're very concrete, they're very measurable. And so we were really just able to transition that into the survey. But with the contemporary math, the outcomes weren't as clearly defined, they weren't as measurable. And so I think, again, there's some opportunity now to come in and fine tune that a little bit and make it a little more detailed. So I think that's really the big piece there. But I would absolutely envision this being in the math department. I wouldn't see it any other way. You'd have to have the math content expertise to teach such a course. Here's another one that's kind of addressed to certain degrees. Could these adoptions happen sooner than the soft launch? And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, that's great if people were able to adopt earlier. We know, again, that some people are a little further along on this, which is great. Another question here is, what is the high school's role to implement this? And that's a good question. And so math pathways, when working with the Dana Center, it's structured kind of in the earlier phases, is primarily a higher education piece. You want to really be able to define what are the pathways, what does those look like, what courses are going to be required, what skills are going to be emphasized. All those pieces, I think, have to be codified and structured. And then the second piece in this, once you get that going, and we're obviously moving, I think, in a positive way, but the second piece in this would be to work more with K-12 and to kind of redefine maybe what some of those pathways will look like. And some other states have done that work, and obviously the Dana Center will be instrumental in that. We have two math folks from K-12 on our group. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get too involved yet with K-12, but I think as we wrap up this year that we will work a lot more closely with K-12, and I think there'll be really good opportunities to work with them, because they're really emphasizing a lot more college planning and preparation and career planning. And I think Math Pathways really works into that nicely. And when we've had some very preliminary discussions with the Kansas State Department of Education and Commissioner Randy Watson, they really like this idea and are very supportive. So I think this will be a great way for us to collaborate. So I am just a minute over my time. I apologize, I went a little bit over. I appreciate everyone that submitted a question. I will definitely answer it. What we will do is take these down and answer them in writing, and then put it on our website and send it to everybody that attended today. We'll try to do that in the near future here. So we will answer your question. Again, I apologize for going over there. I need to get out of my screen here. So we've got just a little after 2:40. So I do want to take a moment here and introduce Jonathan Watts-Hull from University System of Georgia. Georgia has done phenomenal work in this particular space, and we're so fortunate that Jonathan was able to join us today. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm probably going to lose there we go. So I'm now, I really am. I really want to thank you all for having me today. I usually will say I'll try and get us back on track, but I'm nervous about it. But anyways, I'm really excited to talk about this. Georgia, I want to talk about sort of the long journey we took to fully scaling co-requisite learning support. I'm Jonathan Watts-Hull. I'm Associate Vice Chancellor for Student and Faculty Success at the University System of Georgia. I have oversight for our faculty work as well as our student work. It's really important when we knitted these together. It's been really powerful to have that sort of communication together. Give you a little background about University System. We're a little bit bigger than Kansas, not a whole lot bigger, but the biggest difference is we don't have technical colleges in the system. So we have 26 institutions conferring 2- and 4-year degrees. We are the it goes everywhere from our small little Atlanta Metro or South Georgia State College, where they're looking at enrollments of 1,100 up to maybe 1,500, up to Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, who you might have heard of, Georgia State University. We heard about the NIST, the 6th largest institution in the country. We confer a fair number of degrees, 72,000 degrees, 50,000 undergraduate degrees. We have a lot of throughput. We have, and the one thing I think is really important, because we're talking about this, and I know you've done some articulation around the core, and transfer is important. We have a fully articulated core, and that's really important, particularly when we start talking about students starting where they start, but finishing where they need to finish. With respect to our conversation about learning support, we've been fully co-rec since 2018, so we're in our 5th year of full implementation of this. We have a 2-tiered placement structure in math. The conversation about math pathways, this links into this, and we'll get to that sort of later. But I want you to think about, if you're thinking about how you want to drive your math pathways, learning support placement is a way to signal and also to drive some of that. We have about 12,000 students, and again, keep in mind the total enrollment of the system for undergraduates being what it is. That's about 20% plus or minus, and it varies from year to year. But this also is 20% unevenly distributed, right? So there are institutions where there are none. We have 4 institutions that don't offer learning support at all, because they don't admit students who would have a learning support requirement. And we have a handful of students, 6 institutions rather, that are over 60% of their first-time freshmen with learning support requirements. The other thing that's important, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. I wasn't asked to, but I'm happy to answer questions. We've got 4 gateway math courses. They are quantitative reasoning, math modeling, which we sort of look at as one. We have very few institutions that offer both. They either offer one or the other. We have college algebra. We also have elementary statistics, and we have elementary statistics as a gateway math in about 2/3 of our institution, and it does not have a prerequisite. So these are our four. These are our four gateway maths, and we offer learning support for each of those maths. So I want to talk, very briefly, y'all. I did a little digging in your data. Your data looks a little bit different from ours, but not that different. We started this process back in 2013, well, a little bit earlier, and we'll talk about the journey in a bit. But at that point, 20%, fewer than 20% of our students were started in developmental math, our sequence to math, ever passed the gateway. We were doing better in English, but frankly, we weren't doing very well at all. In 2014, we went to the foundations model. So we had a 2-stack model. We went to a single foundations course. It is a much better course. Pass rate went up to 30%, but it wasn't great. And the pass rates in the secondary courses were weak and with pretty low rates of graduation and retention, particularly for students who are starting in in learning support coming out. So we realized that that remediation was really just basically entering the funnel of doom. And we talk about this. One of the things we talk about, and I don't want to linger on this too much, but you can kind of see how students are just dropping out of the system. We had, students who started at learning support. That's 37% of those students at 2-year institutions. It's a substantial number of students. We'd lose up to 93% of those students at 3 years. And one of the things, and what's important to talk about in our journey, I want to really to emphasize this too. We spent a lot of time talking to faculty. You're going to see that in a bit. But we had to be really careful because our developmental ed faculty, as well as our collegiate faculty, were doing really hard and thoughtful, careful work. But it wasn't aligned in the way we needed it to be. It wasn't really effectively getting it where they wanted to go. And students weren't seeing the rewards of that work. And that was critical because we thought when we went to foundations that we had really done our bit. And what we learned was that remediation itself, in many ways, was the roadblock, right? It was a very big roadblock, like a really big roadblock to our students. So let me go through this journey. This is a bit complicated, and I'm not going to delve in too deeply, but you can see that the early stages, and y'all are engaged in this, y'all have engaged in it. I was really excited when I went to the Kansas website and noted that in both math pathways and transforming remediation, you've taken some of the same steps we've done, and you're going through the right processes, and you're having the right discussions. This type of conversation is really important. Getting folks familiar, making people feel at ease with it, and also sort of talking about how you're going to make this work. We had task force. We had a broad group of folks. We brought a lot of people in who maybe, honestly, weren't going to be our friends on this because we wanted to make sure we had some naysayers in the room. We started in 2013. Like I said, we had 6 months of task force just to shape an ad hoc committee that actually went and took some meat on the bones. We had regional meetings where we sold it to the campuses and to the faculties, and then, right when we knew what the model was going to look like, we had 4 brave institutions stand up and say they were willing to pilot this. They did it a year in advance. At about that time, their pilots rolled out. We were also working on going from a single criterion placement index to a multi-measure placement index. So this is a lot of change all at once. I want to be clear about that. We knew it was a lot of change all at once. And you see that compression there between May 15 and July 2017. There's a lot that happens in there. A big part of this, and I was glad to hear Daniel talking about this, is we had a lot of really powerful external partners. So we worked very closely with Complete College America as well as the Dana Center, CCRC, the Community College Resource Center up in New York was powerful. We also really drew heavily on the Georgia Organization for Student Success, which at that point was the Georgia Association for Developmental Ed, GAID, who heretofore had been sort of digging their heels in on the shift towards COREC, but really did actually become really important thought partners with that. And also we drew a lot on, and if y'all have not, even if you're at a 4-year institution, I would really encourage you to talk to AMATIC, the 2-year math association. They do phenomenal work, particularly in the teaching and learning space. So we moved into this pilots. We went to scaling, and I want to sort of say that our scaling was modest at best. We asked for campuses to put about half of all students. So you can see that this is now 3 years after we had started the conversation. We go into scaling half of our students in COREC and half in foundation.
And Jonathan, I'm so sorry to interrupt here. Are you trying to share your screen right now? I apologize because we're just not seeing it. Okay.
I thought I was. My goodness.
I don't think we're seeing it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for interrupting, but yeah.
Hold on a second. I had a very good show, folks, and y'all did not. Let me see if I can do that one more time and see if you can see the screen. I think we're going to try it this way. All right. Goodness gracious. Yeah, this particular episode will be much better on TV. So the slides you have, are you seeing a slide that looks like a timeline?
We can see it now. Not a
All right.
yes, timeline.
Otherwise, you
long
just saw
row.
me very enthusiastically talking about our work. I don't believe there's much to show you. I want to go back just one step. This is the funnel of doom. This is what it looks like in 2-year and 4-year institutions just dropping out of that pipeline. That was a big, showing this to faculty was a big point. Now it sounds like you're further along than that, but here's where we got to. And my apologies for not sharing the screen. But now I know that now you have to actually affirmatively share the screen in Zoom. So everybody learned a little something today. You can see that there is a great deal of activity that happens right here at the end of our at sort of the end of our journey, where things start happening quickly. We had a long deliberative process. I'm going to honor the fact that we had a long deliberative process because we were out there fairly early in the game. That was 10 years ago when we started talking about this, and there was not as much consensus around the co-rec model as I think there is today. As we moved towards implementation, again, we were towards a half of all students were in the co-rec model, and very quickly shifted to a more robust, fully at scale model, which is where I believe y'all are heading shortly. The other thing I'll note, we continue to stay in touch with our faculty and staff. We continue to connect with them through statewide convenings, again, virtual convenings in general, because we can convene deeper and more broadly, but we stay in touch with, because there's still more to learn about this. So what we learned early on, again, I think you've got the right, you're taking the right steps. We learned a lot from other partners. We had early pioneers that were invested in us. We looked at our early success in the pilots. It was unequivocal. We did not feel uncomfortable about it, but we were concerned. When we went out to full implementation, again, half of all students getting placed in, we would see some problems. That fidelity would be a challenge. It was not. When we went to full implementation, which is not to say fully scaled, but scaling the implementation out across half of our students, results remained consistent. They were students in learning support were substantially more likely to succeed than their peers in foundations. And I want to sort of note a terminology shift that we use in Georgia that has actually been really powerful. We do not talk about remediation with students who are in co-requisite. It is not co-requisite remediation. We consider it co-requisite learning support. We think that helps to, and we'll talk about a bit of the other ways. We really do focus on this idea that we're trying to destigmatize the idea that you've started out college and you're now taking a course that is telling you maybe you're not. So students in learning support, after we went to this sort of model, they did equally well as our 4 pilots who had the luxury of having a lot more attention. After the first year, we had planned on having a longer parallel options, but after the first year, the evidence was clear. We also got a new chief academic officer who really drove us forward on this. That was a powerful. Dr. Tristan Denley came through from Tennessee. He'd already scaled it there, and he said, "Why are we waiting?" And the evidence, but he wouldn't have done it if the evidence wasn't there already. Our evidence was so strong that it wasn't just that we needed to move forward. We were doing a disservice by continuing to place students in the foundations model, in that one-step model. But I will say this. I was concerned when we started this and I was talking to faculty about the fact that be prepared to have slightly less robust outcomes when we fully scale, when everybody's in, because there's going to be students with less preparation. And it's really surprising to me now that I said that, because after we went to fully scaled, our outcomes actually improved. Faculty had had a year to work on this model. They had improved the model in the classroom, and students actually in our second year across all levels of preparation, almost all levels of preparation, did better in the co-rec model than the year before, when we only had half as many students. And that's sort of an unexpected outcome. I'm not going to belabor the next sort of 2 points. Other than I want to make sure one of the things we do in the selling point is talking about why it works. And it really is this idea of chained attrition. And I'm not going to, because where y'all are in your journey, I think you already understand this. But for us in Georgia, the year we had 2 models going side by side gave us a really good opportunity to look at the 2 side by side. We know students don't show up when they get that learning support placement, but when they do show up, 3,600 students went into a foundations model. That was a great course, by the way. That course was well designed, and they did pretty well. 74% passed, but there was an exit point right there, and this is the thing they talk about. This is the thing that comes up a lot. Edgewood talks about this all the time. Edgecombe talks about this all the time, that exit points, what you got to get rid of. 68%. So we're already down to half of all these students. And of those, a not so awesome number graduated or completed the course. When you start looking at corecs, you're talking about down to 30% pass rates just with not with corecs, with the foundations model. Flipping this around into into what it looks like at a corec model, you're at 62% because you've eliminated the exit points. So clearly that's a huge benefit. And indeed, a lot of the big benefits going to come out early just by changing that model. We were very careful, and I'm not going to, again, I won't belabor this point, but I do want to share it, that we were very clear.
And I am so sorry to interrupt again, Jonathan. Are you able to reconfigure your settings a little bit here? Because we're still seeing the note slide, I think, here that have your notes, and then the actual presentation screen is quite small. I think some of the folks are having a hard time reading it. So if you could somehow take a moment here and reconfigure that. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
It takes all the fun out of this. Let's see what I can do.
Well, we got your
but now you know the script. You could just read it for me, actually. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Here we go. And I'm going to share. Here we go. We'll try this. Is that better or worse? That's the same.
Unfortunately, we are still in the same boat here.
All right, we're going to try a different one.
Once you get settled, I've got a question about AccuPlacer too.
Okay, yeah. So how's that?
That's great.
That's better, yes.
Cool. Thank you so much. Sorry for interrupting.
It takes a while.
That's great. And we've got a question that asked about the Alex CPL or AccuPlacer. Are you using either of those for placement?
We are. So let's go ahead and zoom right ahead to placement.
Okay.
So yeah. So we use a multi-measure. We started out with a multi-measure that was really complicated. So we started out with what we call an EPI and MPI, and this is what it looks like. So high school GPA, or ACT, or Compass, or high school, or no information SAT. Now, what happened in here in between? Keep in mind, we lost Compass. So we started out with Compass, we had to replace with AccuPlacer, then we had to go to next gen AccuPlacer, then we had to go. So we had all these things. So yes, we do use AccuPlacer. We don't use Alex. We have talked about using Alex because we think Alex is a better, well, there's some suggestion that Alex is a better placement tool because it allows you to place higher. And frankly, there's a stupid bureaucratic reason why we're not using Alex is because we have a statewide contract with AccuPlacer that we're still locked into.
Well, and this particular participant said they feel like AccuPlacer is misplacing students at an alarming rate at their institution. So just
that's
so second part of the question.
This. I don't, well, and this is more to the point is I don't like I don't like any single risk criterion for placement into learning support. This is our current model. And there's two things about our current model, and I want to point them out. One is this disjunctive model. It basically it's a whole series of or statements. So it presumes one thing to start, and that is, and this is a big deal, but sounds like a small deal. The default placement for Georgia is into learning support for all students until we have evidence that it wouldn't be useful or it wouldn't help you. That's not effectively all that different from a model where you're placed into learning support, except for the fact that it does change the way in which it's presented. It also gives us this or statement where we can just start to peel students out. So it's not like they get a risk into, they're getting exempted from. And that's largely the way you'd want to do it. And we allow for any one of these criterion. And so and actually looking at your next gen AccuPlacer scores are roughly where ours are this is going into one of the quantitative reasoning math modeling and elementary statistics. So it's roughly around, it looks like where ours are. Most of our students will not take the AccuPlacer. We have a hard time getting students to place it. We are not allowed to require it. That's again, our board does not want to have any, even they don't have a $5 additional fee. And equally for students who are taking AccuPlacer, if it's the only thing that's going to place them out, our assessment is that they're probably not coming in all that prepared for that test, like not coming prepared for math, but they're just not coming in prepared for the test. And as some of your documents show and stuff, our research shows, like students do better if they know this test has stakes. We still allows people to calculate that math placement index, but there's almost no way to do it because there's almost nothing left that will actually calculate it. We do lean heavily on high school GPA, and I'm going to echo what Daniel said, that high school GPA is a really good predictor. It's a really good predictor of how well students can do school in particular. I like the idea of the board test. We went test optional with pandemic, and we have not yet come back. So we're not seeing a lot of college board tests or ACTs and SATs. We are simply we're in an information desert for some of our students, particularly at open access institutions. And so we're heavily relying on that high school GPA, and we will send students down to AccuPlacer if a student comes in with a lower than 3.1 GPA. They are asked, do you want the learning support placement, or do you want to go and take a test? And here's the routine for the test, and here's what it means for you. So it's a little bit more informed, but it is it is one of those things where we have at our open access institutions, and this is how you get 60% of your students with learning support. They are not necessarily opting out of that testing. So I think that gets to the question. I'm happy to go back over. I want to sort of the nice thing about our model, and I think most models are going this way, is it's resilient to change. So as AccuPlacer changed, we could add a new one. We were not getting concordance tables from AccuPlacer or from Compass. So it became very hard for us to actually concord old scores to new. And we got kind of nervous when we were going to be concording old scores to new within our placement indices. So something else I'll note, and y'all may have already know this, we have a slightly higher threshold to get students for students to exempt learning support for math for college algebra. Also, for our students who come in without an exemption to learning support in math modeling, quantitative reasoning, or elementary statistics, they are not able to enroll in college algebra. That is both something that the math faculty felt very strongly about in our state, but equally it was driven by some evidence about how well students were going to do. This has really helped our math pathways. I'm not gonna lie. When I started pulling our math pathways numbers, it really did change the way in which our students and faculty approached math pathways. But the most important factor was departments and advisors began to sort of see that there were multiple pathways for math that were not college algebra. We were at one point sending 77% of our students through college algebra of one of the gateway maths, and now that's down well under 50%. So our placement, we set a threshold, and I think this is sounding somewhat like, we set a threshold, but institutions can, based on their local criteria, set it a little higher. Most don't, but some do, based on particularly the reliability of the GPA in the high schools, in the area that they're serving. It is at its institutions. It is not in an institution's interest to overplace students into learning support, but they also want to make sure they're catching students who are going to need these specific help assistance. We did set the threshold, and this is a really unambitious level of probability for success. But we also wanted to sort of make sure that if you're getting sent into a collegiate course, you got at least a 60% chance of passing. And in the last 4 years, the amount of data and the way the data has played, high school GPA has become a much less robust predictor, unfortunately, and it's all we've got. I believe it's coming back. I believe that there's a little bit, because I think for 2 years there we were going without great data. The high school GPA, we had a couple of districts that were not giving below a C. We had a couple of districts where there was a great deal of grace. So there was a little bit of fuzziness in the GPA. We feel that's coming back. We are still test optional for this year, but we are in consideration whether we go test optional for next year. We don't use high school GPA as a subject like for the math placement. So we've had campuses ask us, can we use the math high school GPA? Frankly, it becomes a data question. And if you're considering it, it really does put a lot of weight on your admissions folks and your placement folks to understand the data, understand the quality of the courses. Because again, a B in say, advanced algebra or advanced geometry in high school, in a C in calculus in high school will look the same on a GPA unless you really do the quality rate them. And depending on how many districts and schools you're getting from, that becomes really hard to manage. And frankly, high school GPA is about how well you student. And so I think that's an important thing to sort of think about. Is like just having a high school GPA tells us a lot more about having a student, and that's important. And I want to get to this now because it's actually something, I don't want to take up too much of our time, and I'm going to get it kind of out of order. But this is actually something to keep in mind. So this is from our experience with students in co-requisite learning support. How they do in their entire term. So the blue bars are students who pass the gateway course associated with their learning support. The yellow bars are students who don't pass the gateway course for which they have a learning support placement. These are not equal numbers of students, but they're proportionate here. So what you can see is that if a student passes the gateway course for which they have their learning support, most of them are passing all or most of their credits. They are earning most or all of their credits in that semester. They're doing well in school. They're succeeding as students. If students are not passing their gateway course for which they have learning support, they are more often than not failing all or almost all of their credits, which circles back to sort of what's happening in these first year courses anyway. And it's important sort of observation. Oh, I'm sorry, RHSC complete required high school curriculum. So we have a required high school curriculum, 4 courses in math, that must be 3 courses of math that must be completed. And then there's a selection of 4th math courses that students in Georgia high schools can choose from. That's the required high school curriculum in math. I can share that more with you. I mean, I can do that offline. I'll share what our math, but it's basically there are first 3 math courses and then a selected subset of the 4th math courses. For students when they graduate high school. There are some courses that high schools offer for graduation that are acceptable at the technical college system, but we can't accept them as a 4th math course. Anyway, so I want to point out, like, this is why I think high school GPA is actually a really important indicator to have in your bucket for student for determination and learning support. Is high school GPA tells us how well did the student just negotiate high school, and that's a really powerful point to talk about here. So, want to talk a bit about what we learned, and I know I'm kind of rushing through this, and you will have access to these slides. You already do, I think, have access to them, and you actually have a longer set of deck than I'm going to talk about today, but. Again, I mentioned this earlier, most of the gains come from eliminating exit points. That's not all, but there's a lot of gain just be gotten from not having students have an opportunity to walk off and either in between or even before they get into the pipeline. Other structures can have a place. So we're going to talk a bit at the end here about the other structures and what we've learned, because I want to, sort of say, like, it's all should be based on your experience, but there's some things that we've observed that we think are worthwhile. But the bigger part of this now is once you get it in place, and this is why we continue to meet with our faculty, it's really about changing pedagogy, changing curricular structure, using technology and tools. Adaptive learning has been successful, and also thinking about how students use the course and interact with the course. One thing, and so we use, I think, what you would call a combined model, all of our learning support. So all those other models that Daniel was talking about, where you have like a little, preliminary material and then the course, some 8-week and 8-week or 3-week and 12-week. We don't do that. We have just-in-time support. The courses are linked, but there is just-in-time support between the two. It is, and this sort of means that the collegiate course is the collegiate course, and it's the same collegiate course for all. The important thing, and the thing we've learned, is that to do this well, and for this to work well for students, there has to be tight alignment between the collegiate course and the co-requisite support course. And that means essentially what it means, what it looks like. And this is very contentious for faculty, and I understand that. Like, faculty have spent a lot of time refining their course, making them fit both what they believe the material should be introduced and also the way they teach. And somewhat this interrupts that cycle. But for the student, having the same syllabus, the same sequence, the same calendar, the same schedule, the same assessments, the same experience, allows that support course to really fully integrate into the gateway course. And that is the most powerful part of this. I will say, like, if you have the same faculty teaching the same course, sometimes that can be done without that tight alignment, but it's super hard. And I will also say we don't have it in Georgia. There are some institutions, and I know who does it because I can see it in their data, where their learning support is tightly aligned to and they all teach off of one master course shell, and there are places where it is somewhat the Wild West. So I'll say this, like, it's really important because you can also align all the other resources around it. You can emphasize, student instruction, tutoring, peer instruction, study groups, all that stuff can be aligned if you have an aligned course. Something else I'm going to note, and this is something a takeaway. Again, I'm sort of putting this into your task list, but for each campus should have somebody who's coordinating learning support on your campus. I think that's really important for us. We have someone who can respond to, who can talk about policy decisions and placement matters, work with the registrar, work with the admissions folks, work with advisors, but it also is somebody who can sort of talk about learning support with the faculty and help to, and actually help to support the idea of how do you settle on a shared syllabus, how do you settle on a shared schedule, and come back and look at the data. I was really excited to talk about math pathways. Math pathways is really important. And I think it's important to note that as Danny showed up, like the first course students take in college is oftentimes their last course. And if the last course they take in college was intended to get them to calculus, we've done them probably no good service. For us, and I didn't know that y'all are in the discussion about statistics, but it has been the most flexible course for most of our students. It works across a wide range of majors, and it allows students a lot of flexibility in transitioning from one major to another. We teach it without a prerequisite. That was also somewhat of a lift for some of our faculty, but what we have discovered is our students really like it because it's what they will call meaningful math. It's math that can be made fun, math can be made interesting. As you go through this, we use learning support placement. To sort of drive some of our math pathways. We didn't do it intentionally. It was just because the math faculty were very not comfortable having all the cut scores be the same. And so we raised the thresholds for college algebra, and that drove the students and programs away from college algebra as the default math. But to do this work, and this is, I know, outside of the scope of what I'm really brought here to talk about, but your department, talk to your departments, ask your departments and ask your disciplines what's important for you in math. And it sounds like you've done a lot of that. And once you understand what's in the math courses, you can get that aligned, but the advisors have to believe it too. So there's a question about what's an example of a gateway math course. And I think that's, I'm going to answer this. And if I don't answer it correctly, let me know. We have quantitative reasoning and math modeling, elementary statistics, and college algebra. Those are the 4 gateway math courses we teach. So we teach quantitative reasoning, math modeling are almost never taught at the same institution. You either one or the other. And then about 2/3 of our institutions will teach statistics as an elementary statistics as a gateway course. In other words, there's a small minority of schools that don't teach it as what we call an area a gateway math. And then college algebra, and college algebra is still the largest enrollment course, but it's actually not that far ahead of the quant reasoning, math modeling. By and large, we have interestingly, the health sciences majors, humanities and arts majors, generally will gravitate towards that quantitative reasoning, math modeling. Social sciences will gravitate towards statistics, and then business is a flip because they'll need some, they may want them to go towards pre-calculus, so they'll want them to take the college algebra, but statistics is actually a better starting place for some of them to have because it's in all their programs. So that's what that looks like. So a few other things I want to just briefly mention. We talked about course design a bit with our faculty. One of the things that you're going to be challenged with the most is that students will not take your co-requisite course seriously. They just won't be taking the co-req course seriously enough. They won't show up as often as you'd like. And one of the things we've picked up and learned from both our students and our faculty is that the course design may have an impact on this, that students encounter early on in the course. It's nobody's fault, but this is the way we tend to teach. That there's foundation building, and there's sort of you're going through a little bit of review. There's a slow rise in challenge. So students don't encounter challenge that early. And if you're a learning support student, you think, well, I may not need this anymore. And then you hit challenge later, but by that point, students have already cut out. They've already checked out of the learning support classes. So while it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, to punctuate your challenge and to give challenge early, but also if you're going to do that, to allow them to claw their way back from early setbacks, but to help them see that there's value in that learning support course because it's a place where they're going to come and build that math capacity over time. We're not talking about overwhelming students, but we're seeing some course design. We have some departments that are really thoughtfully going through the collegiate course to make sure that the course has an even amount of challenge throughout, and that they're getting challenged early enough so that they know, even if they're not in the learning support course, that they should get into the habit of seeking help, because this is something we know that helps all students. A few other considerations, and Daniel mentioned this, and I'm just going to tell you what our data shows. And this is, again, you're going to have these slides, so you won't have to worry about scribbling this down. The cohort versus commingled model. So the cohort model is all the students in a collegiate course are all learning support, and then they, and again, under best circumstances, they would all be in the same learning support faculty sections. Our data indicate that cohort has stronger outcomes than commingling. In other words, that a course that is combined exclusively of students who are in learning support does better. That's actually kind of interesting, because that's not what was expected when we started. We have been told early on that cohort models was the way to go, puts students of mixed preparation levels in the same class. They can learn from each other. It helps to sort of show model good work. It seems to have better evidence in English, but in math, for whatever reason, some of the benefits of having that mixed model were erased somewhat by the fact that the students in the learning support section began to realize that the students who were doing really well weren't in their learning support section, and maybe I didn't need to be there either, and they would wander off. We aren't entirely certain about that, but we've had much better luck with cohort models. It is also sometimes easier to manage, but that's not, I think, the reason why. I can't emphasize enough that having the same instructor makes a difference, particularly in math. Less so in English, interestingly, but for math, same instructor, both because of the alignment, but also something to do with community building, trust. Students come into math learning support with math anxiety. And helping math students undo their anxiety is a full-time task for some of these folks. And I think there's a degree to which the same instructor, you see them all the time, you're not having to introduce yourself again. It just builds a little bit of trust. I will say our data are a little equivocal on whether 2 or 3 hours are better. 1 hour is not. 1 hour basically is almost no good. The institutions where they've done a single credit hour, it has had very, very little impact. So we will say that there's evidence that two hours may be enough for students on the bubble, and 3 hours for those with greater preparation gaps. But even there, the evidence is not great. Is not great. And again, part of this is about, like, what's your scheduling look like? It's got to be meaningful. It's got to be possible. It's got to be workable for your campuses, and that's going to vary based on your workload. It's going to be varied based on whether you're a 5-day campus or a 4-day campus. So that's something to keep in mind. We also very clearly, this is also kind of important. We have letter grades in the support course. We don't do pass fails. That's important for us because we want students to take it seriously. But what this also is driven is the practice of it being an actual course. So students are turning in assignments, they're having quizzes, there's expectations for math presentations, things like that they do in the learning support course. So that course actually feels like a course, and it's not a review section. And it also helps if you've got somebody who wants to go back and look and see how students are doing in the collegiate course versus their grade versus their grade. It also is important because this is something that students begin to be sensitive to. When we were doing pass fail was basically done on attendance. Graded courses have to have assignments turned in, and those grades, while this course is going to count towards institutional GPA for us. Last bit. So one of the big discussions we've had lately is whether the course should be preview or review. This sounds like it's in the weeds. It is, but the models are both present. But what we're seeing is that and it's a little bit of both. The magic of this is there's probably a little bit of both in it, but there's a degree to which preview learning support, in other words, providing the advanced look at the, sort of thinking about the concepts the student's going to need to know in order to be able to sort of talk about and understand the lesson in the collegiate course is really important to make the most of that collegiate course. And then coming back to the next session with a brief review to make sure everybody caught up, understood, and unpack what was still muddy. But that preview, the primarily preview, seems to have a little bit more benefit. Again, this is where I'd love to have a little bit more data, but this gets into the messiness of how it's effectively done on campuses. And this may change over time too. Early on, if you're not having a lot of challenge in that class, it's going to be okay to do a lot of preview. But if you're getting into a point where students are beginning to struggle and it's a specific section, you may be doing more review because you're realizing you're going to need to catch them up. The last thing about this, and it's really important, is like we've had some great success around embedding growth mindset interventions in our math courses in general. We have about a third of our students go through a course that has a specific growth mindset intervention, brain as a muscle intervention in it. And it does have impacts, beneficial impacts for many of our students, including female students and students of color. And we're looking now at ways to actually amplify that in the learning support course, because there's ways that we're using that to build community and to help students see the purpose, and also sort of build a sense of belonging within that learning support to help them amplify their learning. And that's it. That's a lot of my talking, and I am sorry for the technical difficulties and such. I don't know if you want to. I've got time for questions. If you want to ask me questions, I'm also willing to let you go off to your merry way and your breakouts, which I know will be much more interesting and important. George, what happens when a student is passing?
We have a few questions.
So,
and yeah, how much more time do we have too?
Yeah, go ahead.
this-
Let's go ahead and
Okay.
get, if it's okay with you, Jonathan, if you have time.
sure, I've got time.
We built in
So-
some extra time at the end, so we're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't want to be keeping you all late. So I'm going to stop sharing.
The first question is, could you explain the difference between cohort versus combined?
So great. So a cohort model is when all of the students in the collegiate course are also in learning support. Now, optimally, they will be in not the same, like, so most of our learning support courses are about half the size of, about half the size of the section, the collegiate section. So they might be split before and after, but all of the students in that particular collegiate course are in learning support. They have learning support placements. In a commingled model, usually you'll do seat reserves. You'll have half the students in that course would be with learning support placement, and the other half would not be. And so the accelerated learning project, which was some of the early like Prince Henry Community College, Patrick Henry Community College models, really emphasized like that commingled model, that you want to have students with preparation and students who have lower levels of preparation in the same class, socializing, interacting, engaging. I think that model could work, but what we've seen in our data is that actually when we did that, the students in learning support just did not do as well as for institutions where at the same level of preparation, all the students had learning support together. Because our evidence is different than what we've seen in other places, as you go through this, I would encourage you to look at your models and see, part of this is about what's workable. And that's unfortunate, but that's true. But that allows you the experimentation place to say which one of these works best for us. Probably the critical factor is not really commingled or cohorted, it's whether or not it's the same faculty member. Time and again, we come back to the fact that if the faculty member shifts, if there's a shift change, and even if it's a math specialist, and I'll say this, we thought that different faculty was going to have an impact because they would be like able to like use different strategies, and it just doesn't seem to be the case. And really doesn't seem to be the case for us. And we think that's because it's hard to align it when they're not the same faculty, unless you're requiring faculty to literally co-plan. And by just saying those words, require faculty to co-plan, I realized that no one wants to take off that bite.
Thanks. In Georgia, what happens when a student earns a passing grade in the support course, but not in the credit-bearing course? Can they enroll directly in the credit-bearing course in future semesters, and then what about vice versa?
So the way you exempt learning support is by passing the collegiate course. If you pass the support course, but not, and I say this, it very seldom happens that way. It does happen, but if you pass the collegiate course, the support course, got a C in the support course, but you got a non-passing grade, a D or an F in the collegiate course, you would be in both courses. We've had this conversation about whether or not they could just exempt out of the learning support course, but that's not the way it's structured. And by and large, there's something that happened in that didn't happen in the collegiate course that they're going to need support on. Now, opposite can happen, and if a student passes the collegiate course but fails the learning support course, they are exempt. They have finished their math requirement. That they have finished the collegiate course. We don't make them go back and take that co-requisite support course. That experience is vanishingly small. We don't have a lot of students. I mean, I could pull the data from F23 and look at it, but last time I looked at it, it was fewer than 2% of students who passed collegiate but didn't pass their support course. So we're talking about a small n. of students. The opposite is actually not uncommon, that you've succeeded in the gateway, succeeded in the support course, but not in the gateway. But again, that doesn't mean that you've finished the satisfied. And again, because it's a prerequisite, it is still sort of in your program of study. It's still covered in your program of study, so financially pays for it. It does, you do wind up getting some CPOS issues if you do it repeat too many times.
How are your students advised to take the appropriate pathway, whether they go the algebra route or the statistics route?
Sure. So we in one of the things we do across our system is we have an expectation that students, when they begin their academic career, choose either a focus area, meta major, or a program of study. Those programs of study each have and the focus areas within them. The focus areas are built basically on the first year curriculum that's shared across a host of majors. And within that, we have aligned math pathways. So we actually have a math pathway list. So it basically which courses fit by program, and then on each individual institution, their programs will have worked with their. We have program maps too. So the program maps you were talking about, that actually is a big part of that. So students will say, I want to be this. We do what you call we actually have a personal choice conversation. So our students are expected to have a conversation with an advisor before they register for classes to make sure that they understand what it means to be an art major. It's not just, or what it means to be a biology major. We don't try and talk anybody out of anything, but it's sort of a checkpoint to make sure that they understand the curriculum, they can see everything through, but they're also making this purposeful choice. Most of our institutions arm students with some form of inventory, some sort of interest inventory battery that's going to help them make sure that the thing that they said they wanted to do on the application is the thing they are going to do in college. We have these meaningful conversations with, again, varying levels of fidelity, but we do think this happens fairly consistently across our campuses. And at that point, once you choose your program of study or your focus area, your math is selected. And that's actually, to be honest, the reason we went to focus areas. Focus areas are critically important to get the math right, and also to get that the first electives right for a student, because we really want the student to not just take a bucket of gen ed courses, but to take a selection of gen ed courses as well as a math that aligns with their interest. And so that's how that works. So it specifically looks like there's a question about, and again, I want to make sure it's clear, this is not the University of Georgia. This is the whole Georgia system, everywhere from our state colleges all the way up to our flagships. At some of our schools, it's a little bit different, but but quantitative reasoning would again be a selected math at a department, or we have disciplinary advisory committees. The advisory committees have all agreed this is the appropriate math. By and large, they've settled on one. Ironically, philosophers cannot identify which math they should take. They just wanted to talk about it. But we support them in that. So that's it. I feel like I've gone on too long, and you all have to get to your breakouts.
No, you've been fantastic, Jonathan. Thank you for taking the time, giving you a little applause here from me. So thanks so much this has been extremely helpful.
Well, I'm really, again, I apologize for although you got to see behind the screen. So there's also the opportunity to see me go through 2 times and finally get it right on the 3rd. Best of luck to y'all. I really wish you the best of luck. If there's anything we can do in Georgia, or anything I can do for y'all, please don't hesitate. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks again so much. Okay, well, Amy, if you can go ahead and bring up our paper here for the next piece here. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick group discussion here kind of before we wrap up here. And so obviously the reconvening at 3:30 is not practical now. It's going to be more like, I guess, 3:50 here, but we will need to have a note taker and someone to report out when we come back in here. So we're going to put you in breakouts based on institutional peers. And there's really 2 pieces here, just kind of getting into some general discussion items relating to math pathways. What changes will your institution need to make? And then what challenges do you envision? So if you can kind of jot that down or copy and paste it onto a document. I guess you can't really copy and paste the screen here. So if you can jot that down, though, I'll give you a second here. Then if you do have any technical issues when you're in your room, you can email Amy Robinson. Her email address is there. But I'll just give you a moment here to do that. So again, we will need a note taker as well as someone who will report out here. And so just think of the curricular changes you'll have to make, how you'll kind of work on the personnel that will kind of manage this, because obviously for a smaller community college that may predominantly offer college algebra, expanding from 1 to 3 is a lot. And when I was in another state, I know we had 4 pathways in another state that I was loosely involved in the project there. And we had small community colleges make it work, but it certainly was challenging in a lot of ways. But thinking along those lines, how are you going to communicate the requirements to students? How will this impact academic advising? They're going to play a big role in this. And how will this impact courses on a degree map? How will those be listed? Think of things like that. And then, Amy, if you can go ahead and scroll down here. And essentially, this is what we did, is we designated each institution by population and function. Obviously, the research universities and regionals are separated here along with Washburn, but find where your institution is here, and then you'll be able to go to a room, and you'll see in the bottom right, you'll see the breakout rooms, and you'll see join a breakout room. So if you'll just follow that and then click on the appropriate breakout room based on the institution that you are associated with, and then we will see you back here in 20 minutes. Thank you so much. All right, welcome back, everybody. I know we don't have a ton of time here left, but can the person who's the report out person for group 1 please type their name in the Q&A so we know who it is? Okay. And so Brandon Gong. So Amy, is Brandon able to talk now?
I'm enabling him right now.
Okay, great.
Brandon, you should be allowed.
Yeah, go ahead. So Brandon, what'd you all talk about?
Okay, I'm the interim vice president for academic affairs at Cloud County Community College, and we also had some other people here from Cloud, some folks from Pratt, Independence, and Labette in our group. So for the first question, with what changes we'll need to make, some things that came up were offering stats and contemporary math more regularly, because right now the frequency of those courses are relatively limited because the majority of our students are being put into college algebra. Hardly ever offering contemporary math right now because students are transferring into programs that require college algebra. The prereq of college algebra for stats is a change that'll have to be made. The designing of some of those co-req support courses, how many sections of each will need to be offered of everything. So figuring out if we have students taking, who are going to need to take stats more now, how many, balancing between the 3 courses in our offerings. The transfer aspect of it. So will universities accept contemporary math for the bachelor's degree, transferring out of state? So that one example was a nurse returning to college to pursue a bachelor's BSN and needing college algebra after the fact. And then just figuring out some of the placement scores and cutoffs, but it was acknowledged that having some guidance from the state will help with that. And then the challenges, and I guess obviously some of those changes are certainly challenges as well, but for some other challenges, the professional development for instructors who aren't familiar with teaching more developmental level math, perhaps even finding instructors, because if an institution currently just has people who are better serving as kind of the main math, so finding that professional development for them. Where do students fit in who aren't prepared for gateway courses, even with the co-req? So students who struggle with multiplication tables, for example, or they weren't successful in high school. So is there still potential for maybe still offering some lower level introductory math? Advisor buy-in could be a challenge. Who's supposed to take what, and making sure that all of that information gets out. It was brought up at one area that one full-time instructor is only teaching developmental or remedial courses, so there's the potential for that person to kind of be out of a job unless they move forward to get like a master's degree. And then it'll only really work if the kind of the bucket system really works the way it's designed to, and that students are able to transfer and have the same requirement at the university.
Thank you so much. So group 2, can you please type the reporter, type their name in there? If anybody from group 2 that was going to report out, which was Allen, Coffeyville, Cali, Dodge, Fort Scott, Garden City, Highland, Seward.
I think I'm unmuted.
Okay, good deal.
Okay. I'm Carol White from Highland Community College.
Yeah, and if you could just hit on maybe 1 or 2 big things that came up, that'd be great.
One of the big things is the soft launch in 2025. Is that when the universities will be an acceptance of things like contemporary math? Or is that when we should start offering them and that they won't be really accepted till 2026?
Okay.
Also, what to do about underprepared students that they just mentioned. A lot of our schools do have some college algebra with review or lab. A few of them have no prereqs or no co-reqs, I should say.
Okay.
And that's kind of the brief summary.
Okay, great. And can the group 3 person please type their name in?
I'm not seeing any. Oh, here we go. Rhonda, hold on one moment. There you go, Rhonda.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
That's my picture. All right, so pretty much everything everybody just said for the last 2 groups. A lot of people are worried about developmental courses going away once the co-reqs are put into place. We're still going to have students who perhaps need to still take elementary algebra, intermediate algebra if they've been out of school for 10 years, 15 years, come back, maybe they've been in the military. So developmental courses, I don't think can completely go away. Or will there be co-reqs for everything? Co-reqs for stats may be needed, and possibly a co-req for quant reasoning as well. Once a student determines a path, they go co-req stat or co-req college algebra. So where will the developmental courses stand at that point? We need to kind of talk about that probably. We think that there may need to be some mandatory advising to help these students get into the right pathway and then consequently getting into the correct course. Some of the challenges, what if a student doesn't know what their degree program needs to be, what their major is, they don't know which courses they need to take? What if they change their major? How is that going to change their path? And are they going to have to take duplicate courses over? Another challenge is to know how many sections to offer. If the pathways we're already, if the school is already teaching the co-requisite courses, then pathways gets put into place. Will it be true that less college algebra courses will be required because we'll go this quant way for most students, and only the STEM students will need to go college algebra route? And understanding how many courses we even need to offer to accommodate all of those students on their journey. Did I leave anything out?
Thank you so much. And group 4, which is the technical college sector. You type your name in, please, for us.
I've got Brian, and I'm enabling him right now.
Okay, very good, Brian. Good to see you.
There you go, Brian.
There we go. Hey, Daniel.
Hey.
So one of our biggest concerns, again, was having enough teachers to teach those sections with technical colleges not having as many as say the 2-year, 4-year colleges.
Right.
Another concern was that not bringing the high schools in quick enough. We feel like there's a lot of concurrent credit, especially the 2-year sectors, that we would like to see the high schools brought in a lot more than what we are as like the timeline.
Yeah.
And I think that's about it.
Okay, good deal. And so it looks like we've got Grady Dixon from the regionals, and if group 6, the research universities, go ahead and plug their name in, that'd be great too.
Yeah, Daniel, a lot of what has already been said is things we talked about, but I would say the number one word that was repeated in our session was communication. Communication with the current students that they do not need college algebra in the cases we've been discussing, that stats will suffice and will continue to suffice perhaps if they change majors.
Okay.
And then maybe a bigger lift, because it's a little bit beyond our control, is the communicating with non-math departments that they may not need to require college algebra, even though they have in the past, and parents who feel like college algebra is some sort of important course, especially for the concurrent credit dual enrollment sorts of situations.
Good point. Good point. Anything else?
That's it.
Thanks so much. Okay, looks like Gene Redeker is going to represent the Research University section from KU. Go ahead, Gene.
Thank you, Daniel. This is Jean Redeker at the University of Kansas. Much of what our group talked about has already been expressed. The challenges of creating co-requisite courses, the implications for faculty workload is fairly significant. Staffing issues are a concern. And so we're trying to figure that out. There will have to be some changes with prerequisites for math courses and some other changes, which may be difficult. There also needs to make sure that we put all the changes through our faculty governance process. We talked about the difficulty of implementing a cohort model at a larger institution, and the challenges with placement as well as enrollment. There was concern for how undecided students would be handled, as well as students changing majors, because we want to make sure that they get in the right math course if they haven't decided yet. But also, if a student is changing their major, we want to make sure that in some cases they're not having to take multiple courses. That's pretty much, I think, it.
Great. Well, I apologize keeping you 3 minutes over. I appreciate you all hanging on. The vast majority hung on for this. So appreciate you all being here. I appreciate everyone that submitted questions. Again, we will get everyone a response. We are going to get a website up and running, but we'll email everyone that participated. Obviously, we have your email addresses. And again, I wholeheartedly apologize to everyone about the technical issue with the mobile devices not working with the rooms here. I should have noted that at the beginning, and I failed to do so. So I apologize, but we are wrapped up for today. So thank you all so much for attending. This has been great. Thank you so much.